He returned from war to an empty house, and the letter just said, "Don't look for me." The chill of autumn air, sharp with the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke, often carries with it a subtle melancholy. It's a season that invites introspection, a time when the vibrant hues of summer fade, leaving behind a landscape that, while beautiful in its own right, whispers of endings. We gather indoors, drawn to warmth and light, perhaps seeking solace in stories that remind us of enduring connections, of shared humanity. It's in these quiet moments, when the world outside seems to draw inward, that we often confront the deeper currents of our own existence, the echoes of our shared past, and the enduring questions about what it means to be human. This particular autumn, however, the air carried more than just the usual seasonal transition. It carried the weight of memory, the lingering specter of a conflict that had, for a time, threatened to consume the very soul of civilization. It was a war that had carved deep fissures across continents, a cataclysm so profound that its scars still resonate, shaping the world we inhabit today. Yet, within this vast and terrible tapestry of destruction, there existed threads of an entirely different nature, threads woven from acts of astonishing grace, moments of unexpected kindness that defied the brutal logic of war. These are not the tales that typically dominate the grand narratives of conflict, the accounts of battles won or lost, of strategies devised and executed. Instead, they are the quiet, almost whispered stories, the intimate gestures that bloomed in the most desolate of landscapes, proving that even when humanity seemed at its absolute worst, it was also capable of its absolute best. This is the terrain we explore today, a journey not into the heart of military strategy or political machinations, but into the very core of the human spirit. We are drawn to the paradox of war, a crucible that forges unimaginable cruelty, yet also inexplicably can ignite the most profound acts of empathy and compassion. We speak of a time when nations were locked in a struggle for survival, when ideologies clashed with the ferocity of thunder, and when the very concept of an enemy was etched into the fabric of daily life with stark, unforgiving lines. Yet history, in its infinitely complex and often contradictory way, reveals that these lines were not always impermeable. They were at times blurred, even erased, by the simple yet revolutionary act of recognizing the shared humanity in another, even one clad in the uniform of an adversary. Our focus is not on the victors or the vanquished in the traditional sense, but on a different kind of victory, the triumph of the human heart over the despair and hatred that war so effectively cultivates. We will delve into the real-life accounts of soldiers, civilians, and even those caught in the crossfire, who, in the face of overwhelming darkness, chose a path illuminated by empathy, forgiveness, and a deep-seated understanding of shared vulnerability. Consider the profound dissonance of a battlefield, a place designed for the systematic dismantling of human life, the air thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder, the ground trembling with the percussive roar of artillery, the constant, gnawing fear that corrodes the soul. It is a landscape engineered for detachment, for dehumanization, where the other is reduced to a target, a statistic, an obstacle to be overcome. Within this brutal calculus, where survival often hinges on the ability to suppress one's own emotional responses, the emergence of compassion is not merely surprising, it is, in many ways, miraculous. It challenges the very foundations of warfare, suggesting that the instinct to connect, to protect, to offer solace, can persist even when every external force conspires to extinguish it. This is the unique angle we bring to the enduring narrative of the Second World War. We move beyond the well-trodden paths of grand strategy and heroic deeds to uncover the quieter, more profound moments that reveal the resilience of the human spirit. We are not interested in romanticizing war, nor in diminishing the immense suffering it caused. Instead, we seek to illuminate the instances where, against all odds, the better angels of our nature found expression, demonstrating that even in the deepest trenches, a flicker of light could persist. Our exploration will take us through a series of interwoven narratives, each a testament to this enduring capacity for good. We will encounter situations where the instinct for self-preservation was momentarily suspended by an overwhelming sense of shared suffering, where the rigid boundaries of us versus them dissolved in the face of a common human experience. These are stories that require us to suspend our preconceived notions about the nature of conflict and to open our minds to the possibility of redemption and connection in the most unlikely of circumstances. The journey ahead is one of emotional resonance, blending historical fact with poetic interpretation, aiming to evoke a visceral understanding of these pivotal moments. We will navigate the treacherous currents of tension and despair, only to find unexpected havens of relief and human connection. This is not a simple recounting of events. It is an invitation to feel, to reflect, and ultimately, to be inspired by the enduring power of empathy. A power that, as we will discover, has the remarkable ability to survive even the most devastating of wars. The echo of humanity, we believe, is found not only in its grandest achievements but in its most quiet, compassionate acts, a truth that resonates across time and circumstance. The weight of the world, it seemed, had settled upon the shoulders of a young man named Thomas. The year was 1944, and the air in the Ardennes forest was a biting testament to the brutal winter that had descended upon Europe. Each breath was a shard of ice, each fallen leaf a brittle memory of warmer days. Thomas, barely out of his teens, was a soldier in the American forces, his face etched with a weariness that no amount of sleep could alleviate. The constant hum of distant artillery, the crackle of unseen gunfire, the ever-present scent of fear and damp earth. These were the sensory details that had become his new reality. He was a cog in a vast, relentless machine, his days a blur of patrols, defensive positions, and the gnawing anxiety of what the next sunrise might bring. The camaraderie of his fellow soldiers was a lifeline, a fragile shield against the encroaching despair. Yet even in their shared hardship, each man carried his own silent burdens, his own private fears. The enemy, a faceless, formidable force, was a constant presence, a phantom lurking in the snow-laden trees, a source of perpetual dread. One particularly bleak afternoon, as the sky bled into a bruised twilight purple, Thomas's unit was tasked with a dangerous reconnaissance mission. They moved with practiced stealth, their breath misting in the frigid air, their senses heightened to an almost unbearable degree. Every snapped twig, every rustle of leaves, sent a jolt of adrenaline through their systems. The objective was to identify enemy positions, to gather intelligence that might prevent a larger, more devastating engagement. The silence, when it fell, was more unnerving than any noise, a pregnant pause before the inevitable storm. They had been advancing for what felt like hours, the oppressive stillness of the forest amplifying their own heartbeats, when a sudden, sharp crack split the air. It wasn't the familiar thunder of artillery, but the distinct, terrifying sound of a rifle shot. Thomas and his comrades immediately dropped to the ground, their own weapons raised, scanning the dense undergrowth for any sign of movement. The air crackled with tension, each man's mind racing, anticipating the next move, the next deadly exchange. Then, a sound that was utterly out of place, a sound that seemed to mock the very nature of their deadly endeavor, a soft, almost pained cry. It wasn't a shout of defiance or a scream of agony, but a low, involuntary sound of distress. Thomas, his heart pounding against his ribs, cautiously raised his head, his eyes sweeping across the snow-dusted ground. He saw him then, a young man no older than himself, clad in the drab gray uniform of the German Wehrmacht, lying awkwardly amidst a tangle of thorny bushes. He was clutching his leg, his face contorted in pain, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and desperation. The rifle lay discarded a few feet away, its deadly purpose momentarily forgotten. Thomas's training kicked in, the ingrained instinct to neutralize the threat. His finger tightened on the trigger, his gaze locked onto the fallen enemy. This was it. The moment he had been trained for, the moment where the abstract concept of enemy became a tangible, vulnerable human being. But as he looked, something shifted. He saw not a uniform, not a symbol of an opposing ideology, but a young man, clearly in pain, clearly afraid. The cry he had heard echoed in Thomas's mind, a stark reminder of their shared vulnerability, their shared humanity. The scene was a microcosm of the larger conflict, a stark tableau of the brutal efficiency of war juxtaposed with the persistent, undeniable presence of human suffering. The fallen soldier, an adversary moments before, was now simply a human being in need. The enemy's uniform, so often a symbol of hatred and division, now seemed like a flimsy disguise, unable to conceal the raw, universal experience of pain. Thomas's finger remained on the trigger, a physical manifestation of the internal conflict raging within him. The directives were clear, the stakes impossibly high, yet the young man's pained expression, his quiet suffering, had pierced through the hardened shell of wartime conditioning. It was a moment suspended in time, a fragile pause in the relentless march of destruction. The forest, which had moments before seemed alive with menace, now held its breath, a silent witness to a silent battle being waged, not with bullets, but within the confines of a single soldier's conscience. This single unexpected cry, this unexpected sight, had the power to momentarily dismantle the entire edifice of enmity, revealing the raw, vulnerable core of humanity that lay beneath. The air in the small, dimly lit room was thick with unspoken grief. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight that pierced the gloom, illuminating the worn fabric of an armchair and the faded photographs on a mantelpiece. It was a scene of quiet domesticity, a snapshot of a life lived, now marked by an absence so profound it felt like a physical void. The house itself seemed to hold its breath, a silent sentinel to the memories it contained. Outside, the world continued its relentless march, oblivious to the personal tragedy unfolding within these walls. The war, that distant, all-consuming force, had reached into this quiet corner of existence, not with the thunder of bombs or the clash of armies, but with a silence that was more devastating than any explosion. The young woman sitting by the window, her gaze fixed on the empty street, was Eleanor. Her husband, John, a soldier, had gone to war, as so many had. He had promised to return, to this house, to her, to the life they had built together. But the war, as it often did, had a way of rewriting promises, of scattering dreams like leaves in a storm. The telegram had arrived a week prior, a stark, impersonal herald of devastating news. It offered no explanations, no solace, only a cold, bureaucratic confirmation of loss. John was missing in action. The words themselves were a cruel paradox, suggesting a possibility of return while simultaneously confirming the grim reality of his absence. For days, Eleanor had existed in a state of suspended animation, caught between the desperate hope of his survival and the crushing weight of her worst fears. She replayed their last moments together, searching for clues, for signs she might have missed, for a way to have altered the course of events. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren sent a jolt of false hope through her, only to be followed by a deeper plunge into despair. The house, once filled with their shared laughter and quiet companionship, now echoed with her solitary sorrow. The photographs on the mantelpiece, frozen smiles from a time before, seemed to mock her with their captured happiness. Then, a week after the telegram, another letter arrived. It was not from the military, not an official communication, but a thin, unassuming envelope bearing John's familiar handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened it, a desperate surge of hope warring with a profound sense of dread. The words inside were brief, almost cryptic, yet they delivered a blow far more potent than any official notice. "Don't look for me," it read. "I can't come back. I'm not who you think I am." There was no further explanation, no indication of his whereabouts. Only a stark, devastating severance. The implication was clear. John was alive, but he was gone, not just from the battlefield, but from her life, from the very identity she had known. The war had not only taken him from her physically, but it had also stolen the man she loved, replacing him with a stranger, a ghost. The emptiness of the house now mirrored the emptiness in her heart, a chasm opened by the war's unseen casualties, the shattered lives, the broken trusts, the profound, irretrievable losses that extended far beyond the battlefield. The silence that followed the reading of that letter was absolute, a deafening testament to a love lost, a life irrevocably altered, a stark reminder that the true cost of war often extends far beyond the immediate conflict, leaving behind a legacy of profound personal devastation. The weight of John's letter settled upon Eleanor not as a definitive end, but as a bewildering new beginning. The war had not only claimed his presence on the battlefield, but had seemingly reshaped his very essence, leaving her grappling with a profound identity crisis. This was a common, though often unacknowledged, casualty of prolonged conflict: the erosion of the self. the subtle yet devastating alteration of a person's core being under the immense pressure of combat and survival. John's words, "I'm not who you think I am," spoke volumes about the psychological toll of his experiences, hinting at actions or transformations that rendered him unrecognizable, even to himself, let alone to his devoted wife. The war had stripped away the familiar layers of his personality, exposing a raw, perhaps fractured individual shaped by unimaginable circumstances. Consider how this psychological metamorphosis occurs, a phenomenon studied by psychologists observing soldiers returning from intense combat zones. It's not merely about physical scars, it's about the deep imprinting of trauma on the psyche, the constant exposure to violence, the necessity of making life-or-death decisions, the desensitization required to endure horrors. These experiences fundamentally alter neural pathways. A soldier might develop hypervigilance, a constant state of alert, or conversely, emotional blunting, an inability to feel joy or sadness. John's cryptic message suggests he had crossed a threshold, perhaps engaging in acts that were necessary for survival, but irreconcilable with the man Eleanor had married. His inability to face her, his desperate plea for her not to search, stemmed from a profound sense of shame or a terrifying awareness of his own altered state. He feared not just her judgment, but perhaps his own inability to reintegrate into the life he had left behind. Furthermore, the concept of enemy itself underwent a radical transformation in the crucible of total war. For men like John, the abstract enemy often became intensely personal, a tangible threat to be overcome by any means necessary. This could lead to actions that, viewed from the relative safety of civilian life, would be considered abhorrent. However, within the brutal logic of the battlefield, these actions might have been perceived as essential for survival, for the protection of comrades, or even as acts of desperate reprisal. The psychological burden of these actions could be immense, creating a chasm between the soldier's wartime self and the person they once were, or aspired to be. John's letter, therefore, was an act of self-preservation as much as it was a severance. By urging Eleanor not to look for him, he was attempting to shield her from the harsh realities he had faced, realities that had irrevocably changed him. He was, in essence, trying to protect the memory she held of him, even as he acknowledged that he could no longer embody that memory. This internal conflict between the soldier and the man, the survivor and the individual, is a recurring theme in the aftermath of war. It highlights the profound disconnect that can arise when individuals are forced to operate outside the norms of civilized society. The war had, in a sense, created a new identity for John, one forged in the fires of conflict, and he recognized that this new identity was incompatible with the life he had shared with Eleanor. His decision to disappear was a tragic consequence of this internal schism, a desperate attempt to prevent further pain, both for himself and for her. He understood, perhaps more acutely than Eleanor could at that moment, that the man who had left for war was no longer the man who could return. The war had not only taken him from her, but it had also, in a way, taken him from himself, leaving behind a ghost of the man he once was, a ghost who could not bear to face the light of his former life. Consequently, Eleanor's experience, while deeply personal, resonates with a broader truth about the invisible wounds of war. The war's impact extended far beyond the physical battlefields, permeating the lives of soldiers and their families through psychological trauma, broken relationships, and shattered identities. John's letter, a stark testament to this unseen devastation, served as a painful reminder that victory on the battlefield could come at the cost of profound personal loss and transformation. It underscored the complex and often devastating consequences of war, which continue to echo long after the last shot has been fired, leaving behind a landscape of altered lives and unspoken sorrows, a testament to the enduring and often heartbreaking impact of conflict on the human spirit. The chilling finality of John's letter, "Don't look for me," plunged Eleanor into a new kind of desolation. It wasn't the sharp agony of loss, but a dull, persistent ache of bewilderment and a gnawing sense of injustice. The war had not only stolen her husband, but it had also, it seemed, stolen his very agency, leaving him a prisoner of his own altered psyche. This psychological imprisonment, a consequence of the intense pressures of combat, is a profound facet of war's devastation, often overlooked in favor of more visible casualties. Consider the concept of moral injury, a term increasingly used to describe the psychological distress that arises from actions, or the witnessing of actions, that violate one's deeply held moral beliefs. For a soldier like John, the battlefield can become a moral minefield, forcing choices that leave indelible marks on the soul. His inability to reconcile his wartime experiences with his former self, leading to his desperate message, exemplifies this internal conflict. He was not merely absent, he was psychologically absent from the man Eleanor had known, a man who, in John's own estimation, could no longer exist. Building on this, however, it's crucial to understand that this moral injury is not a sign of weakness, but a testament to the soldier's inherent humanity. It is precisely because John possessed a moral compass, a sense of right and wrong rooted in his life with Eleanor, that his wartime actions, whatever they may have been, caused such profound internal turmoil. The capacity for empathy, for recognizing the humanity in others, is not extinguished by war. Rather, it can be severely tested, leading to a painful dissonance when that empathy is either suppressed or, paradoxically, overridden by the brutal necessities of survival. John's desperate plea wasn't just about self-preservation, it was also, in a twisted way, an act of protection for Eleanor. He likely believed that revealing the full extent of his transformation would shatter her image of him completely, causing a pain far greater than his mere absence. He was attempting to preserve the memory of the man she loved, even as he acknowledged he could no longer be that man. This complex interplay of guilt, self-protection, and a lingering sense of love, however distorted by trauma, paints a far more nuanced picture of a soldier's internal struggle than simple desertion or death. Furthermore, the very act of writing such a letter, under immense duress and likely in secret, speaks to a residual connection, a desperate attempt to communicate a truth that could not be spoken aloud. It's a testament to the enduring power of human relationships, even when fractured by the trauma of war. Imagine the internal debate, the urge to confess versus the need to disappear, the desire for absolution versus the fear of judgment, the lingering love for Eleanor versus the overwhelming burden of his wartime self. This internal monologue, played out in the quiet moments between battles or during clandestine respites, would have been agonizing. His choice to sever ties, while devastating for Eleanor, was, from his perspective, the only way to contain the damage, to prevent the darkness he had experienced from consuming the light of their shared past. It was a tragic paradox, an act of profound separation born from a desperate, albeit misguided attempt to preserve what little of their shared life he felt remained intact. Consequently, Eleanor's experience serves as a poignant illustration of the unseen casualties of war, the broken bonds, the shattered identities, the profound psychological scars that linger long after the fighting ceases. John's letter, a mere handful of words, represented a universe of unspoken trauma, a testament to the war's ability to fundamentally alter not just lives, but the very essence of who people were. It highlights how the psychological landscape of a soldier can be as profoundly scarred as any physical terrain. Now consider how this applies when you face a situation where someone you know seems irrevocably changed by their experiences, perhaps withdrawing or acting in ways that are difficult to comprehend. Understanding the potential for deep psychological shifts, for moral injury, can offer a pathway towards empathy, even when direct communication is impossible. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest act of compassion is not to demand answers, but to acknowledge the unseen battles being fought and to offer space for healing, however distant that may seem. The war had created an unbridgeable gulf, and John's letter was his desperate final attempt to communicate the impossible reality of his altered existence. The profound psychological chasm that war creates isn't always a one-way street of suffering. Sometimes the very act of confronting the enemy can trigger an unexpected, almost paradoxical response, not of hatred, but of a shared recognition of fundamental humanity. Consider the case of Sergeant Miller, a seasoned American soldier fighting in the Pacific Theater. His unit had been engaged in brutal island-hopping campaigns, facing an enemy known for its fierce resistance and often fanatical defense. The dehumanization of the Japanese forces was a necessary, albeit grim, psychological tool for survival. They were the enemy, an abstract entity to be overcome. Yet, during a particularly harrowing skirmish on Okinawa, Miller found himself separated from his unit, pinned down by intense machine gun fire. His ammunition was depleted, his situation desperate. As the firing intensified, a lone Japanese soldier, apparently also separated from his own unit, stumbled into Miller's line of sight. This wasn't a planned encounter. It was a chance collision in the chaotic maelstrom of battle. Both men were clearly exhausted, wounded, and utterly alone. In that suspended moment, stripped of the grand narratives of war and the propaganda that fueled it, they were simply two men facing imminent death. Miller, bracing for the inevitable, saw not the face of an ideological foe, but the raw, unadorned fear in the young Japanese soldier's eyes, a mirror of his own terror. The soldier, in turn, seemed to freeze, perhaps recognizing the futility of further aggression in their shared predicament. The machine gun fire from a third, unseen position continued to rake the area, indifferent to their unspoken truce. Building on this unexpected pause, a silent, almost primal understanding passed between them. The shared vulnerability, the immediate threat to both their lives, transcended the animosity of nations. The Japanese soldier, instead of attacking, made a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture, a slight nod towards a shallow gully nearby, a natural depression in the earth that offered scant but vital cover. It was a gesture that acknowledged their mutual peril and offered a sliver of hope. Miller, after a moment of stunned disbelief, understood. He scrambled into the gully, the Japanese soldier following suit. Their bodies pressed close together in the confined space, the roar of the enemy fire now a deafening symphony around them. This wasn't an act of surrender or strategic brilliance. It was an instinctual act of shared survival, a fleeting moment where the labels of friend and foe dissolved in the face of a common existential threat. Furthermore, this shared experience, though brief and fraught with peril, illustrates a crucial aspect of human psychology under duress: the potential for empathy to override ingrained hostility. The Japanese soldier, trained in a culture that emphasized duty and sacrifice, could have easily used Miller's vulnerability to his advantage. However, the immediate, overwhelming reality of their shared danger, coupled perhaps with a flicker of recognition of their common humanity, prompted a different response. This wasn't about forgiveness in the abstract, but about a pragmatic, instinctual act of solidarity born from the extreme circumstances. It was a microcosm of how, even within the most brutal of conflicts, the fundamental human drive to connect and, in some measure, to protect can surface. The war had not erased their shared humanity. It had merely buried it beneath layers of fear and ideological conflict, layers that, under specific conditions, could be momentarily stripped away. Consequently, the significance of such encounters lies not in their frequency, but in their very existence. They serve as potent counterpoints to the dominant narratives of unyielding animosity. Sergeant Miller, upon his eventual reunion with his unit, never spoke of the incident. It remained a deeply personal, almost sacred memory, a testament to a moment of unexpected grace in the heart of hell. This unspoken act of empathy, this fleeting alliance between enemies, underscores a profound truth: that the capacity for compassion is an intrinsic part of the human condition, a spark that can endure even in the deepest darkness, a silent echo of humanity persisting against all odds. It offers a glimpse into the complex tapestry of human behavior during wartime, where the lines between enemy and fellow human can blur in the crucible of shared experience and immediate peril. The stark realities of the Eastern Front presented a different, yet equally profound landscape for acts of unexpected compassion. Here, the conflict was not merely between armies, but between ideologies that sought to fundamentally reshape the world, a clash amplified by brutal campaigns and devastating atrocities. Amidst this maelstrom, stories emerge of individuals who, despite the pervasive climate of fear and hatred, found ways to extend a hand of solidarity across the barbed wire. Consider the quiet heroism of Anya, a young Russian nurse working in a field hospital near Stalingrad. The winter of 1942 was a time of unimaginable suffering, where death was a constant companion and resources were perpetually scarce. Her days were a blur of tending to the grievously wounded, both Soviet and German soldiers, often with little more than basic field dressings and sheer willpower. Building on this grim reality, Anya's personal battle wasn't just against disease and injury, but against the dehumanizing narrative that painted the enemy as irredeemably evil. One frigid evening, While tending to a gravely wounded German Luftwaffe pilot, she noticed his desperate thirst. The hospital's water supply was critically low, a fact that caused immense hardship for all patients. Yet, looking at the young pilot's parched lips and pleading eyes, Anya made a decision that defied the prevailing sentiment of animosity. She discreetly took her own meager water ration, a precious commodity, and carefully poured it into a dented metal cup, offering it to him. He accepted it with a trembling hand, his eyes conveying a silent gratitude that transcended language and uniform. This simple act, a defiance of wartime scarcity and animosity, was a profound assertion of shared vulnerability. It wasn't about condoning the war or excusing the actions of either side. It was about recognizing the fundamental human need for sustenance and comfort, a need that knew no nationality. Furthermore, this act of quiet defiance by Anya was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader, albeit often hidden, current of humanity. While official propaganda relentlessly demonized the enemy, many individuals on the ground, those who bore the direct brunt of the conflict, found themselves increasingly capable of seeing beyond the imposed labels. The shared experience of suffering, the universal fear of death, and the primal instinct for survival could, in moments of profound crisis, foster a sense of shared experience that transcended national boundaries. Anya's act, though small in the grand scheme of the war, represented a powerful refusal to let the conflict extinguish her innate capacity for empathy. It demonstrated that even when surrounded by overwhelming destruction and hatred, the impulse to alleviate suffering could still find expression, a quiet rebellion against the dehumanizing forces at play. Another crucial layer to consider is the psychological impact of witnessing such acts. For other patients, both Soviet and German, who may have observed Anya's quiet act of kindness, it offered a different perspective, a crack in the monolithic narrative of hatred. It provided a tangible example that compassion could exist, that the enemy was not a faceless monster but, in moments, a fellow human being in pain. This doesn't diminish the horrors of the Eastern Front, nor does it suggest widespread fraternization. Instead, it highlights the complex and often contradictory nature of human behavior under extreme duress. The war created an environment where such acts were dangerous, potentially leading to severe repercussions for Anya and those she cared for. Yet, the fact that they occurred, and that stories like hers have survived, speaks to the enduring resilience of the human spirit, its persistent inclination towards kindness, even when faced with overwhelming adversity. Anya's simple gesture, a cup of water offered in the dead of winter, became a silent testament to the enduring power of empathy, a small but significant echo of humanity, persisting amidst the profound darkness of war. The vastness of the war often obscured the individual stories, the quiet moments of moral courage that flickered within the inferno. Beyond the battlefield, in the occupied territories, a different kind of struggle for humanity unfolded. Consider the plight of civilians caught between warring factions, their lives dictated by the whims of occupying forces. In France, under the shadow of Nazi occupation, networks of ordinary citizens engaged in acts of profound empathy, risking everything to protect those deemed enemies by the regime. These were not soldiers, not trained resistance fighters, but shopkeepers, farmers, teachers, individuals who, by their own moral compass, refused to stand idly by as their neighbors were persecuted. Building on this, however, these acts often manifested in subtle, clandestine ways. A baker might have hidden a Jewish family in his cellar, sharing his dwindling rations, knowing that discovery meant certain death for all involved. A physician might have falsified medical records to shield individuals from forced labor or deportation, their professional ethics transformed into acts of quiet rebellion. These were not grand gestures of defiance, but small, persistent acts of kindness, woven into the fabric of daily life. The risk was immense, the potential consequences dire, yet the moral imperative to act, to alleviate suffering, proved stronger than the pervasive fear. This demonstrates that empathy in wartime is not solely the domain of soldiers. It is a deeply ingrained human response that can flourish even in the most oppressive environments, fueled by a commitment to shared humanity. Furthermore, the psychological impact of such covert resistance on the perpetrators themselves is a crucial, often overlooked aspect. These individuals lived with constant anxiety, the perpetual threat of exposure hanging over them. Yet the act of protecting another, of actively resisting the dehumanizing policies of the occupation, provided a powerful sense of agency and moral fortitude. It was a way of reclaiming their own humanity, of asserting their values in a world that sought to strip them of their dignity. The shared secret, the unspoken bond between rescuer and rescued, created a profound connection, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and its capacity to forge solidarity even in the face of overwhelming oppression. Conversely, the enemy's perspective within occupied territories also offers insights. While official policies dictated harsh and often brutal treatment of civilian populations, individual soldiers, far from home and often disillusioned, sometimes found themselves compelled by unexpected circumstances to act with a degree of compassion. Imagine a German soldier, tasked with enforcing curfews, who subtly warned a civilian of an impending raid, allowing them precious moments to conceal forbidden goods or seek shelter. These were not acts of overt rebellion, but small, almost imperceptible deviations from protocol, born from a fleeting moment of shared humanity or a flicker of conscience. These instances, though rare and often undocumented, reveal that the rigid dichotomy of oppressor and oppressed could, at times, be complicated by individual moral choices. Another crucial layer to consider is the long-term echo of these acts. The individuals who were hidden, protected, and aided during the war carried these memories with them, often for decades. These acts of kindness became foundational narratives, shaping their understanding of human potential and the importance of moral courage. They serve as powerful reminders that even in the darkest hours, the seeds of hope and compassion can be sown, demonstrating that the human capacity for empathy is not easily extinguished, but rather can endure and even thrive, leaving a lasting legacy of resilience and interconnectedness. Now, consider how this applies when you encounter situations where individuals are under immense pressure to conform to harmful norms. The quiet courage of those who choose a different path, even in small ways, can have a profound and lasting impact. The psychological landscape of wartime prisoners of war presents a unique and often harrowing dimension of human experience, a testament to both the depths of despair and the remarkable resilience of the spirit. Imagine the isolation, the constant uncertainty, the physical deprivations endured by those held captive behind enemy lines. For these individuals, the war was not a distant conflict, but an immediate, oppressive reality, a daily struggle for survival against overwhelming odds. Consider the story of Captain Eva Rostova, a Soviet pilot captured during the Battle of Kursk. Her initial days in the POW camp were marked by extreme hardship, meager rations, brutal interrogations, and the chilling realization that her fate rested entirely in the hands of her captors. The enemy, the very force she had been trained to fight, was now her sole provider, her captor, and, in a terrifying inversion of roles, her potential lifeline. Building on this, however, the dynamics within POW camps often transcended the simple master-slave relationship imposed by war. While captivity was inherently dehumanizing, instances of unexpected empathy could emerge, often born from shared human experiences that transcended national animosity. Eva, through her interactions with a German medic named Klaus, began to witness this complex interplay. Klaus, a young man deeply affected by the carnage he witnessed daily, saw in Eva not just an enemy combatant, but a fellow human being enduring immense suffering. He would subtly ensure she received slightly larger portions of food, or discreetly provide her with extra blankets during the frigid nights. These were not acts of overt defiance, but small clandestine gestures of shared humanity, a silent acknowledgement of their common vulnerability in the face of war's indiscriminate cruelty. Klaus's actions weren't about betraying his country, but about refusing to let the war extinguish his own moral compass, his innate capacity to recognize suffering and offer solace. Furthermore, the psychological toll of captivity was immense. Yet within these grim confines, prisoners often developed intricate coping mechanisms and unexpected forms of solidarity. Eva, for instance, found strength in forming bonds with her fellow captives, sharing stories, offering mutual encouragement, and collectively resisting the psychological pressure to succumb to despair. They created their own internal social structures, their own rules of engagement, their own small pockets of normalcy within the abnormal. This communal resilience, this refusal to be utterly broken, was a powerful form of resistance, a testament to the human need for connection and shared purpose. The shared experience of captivity, while a source of immense suffering, paradoxically fostered a profound sense of camaraderie, a recognition that their collective strength was greater than their individual despair. Conversely, the captors themselves were not monolithic figures of pure malice. Many German soldiers and guards were also victims of the war, subjected to immense pressure, propaganda, and the psychological strain of prolonged conflict. Klaus's empathy for Eva stemmed, in part, from his own experiences of witnessing widespread suffering and his internal conflict with the brutal realities of war. He understood, on a visceral level, the pain of injury and the gnawing fear of the unknown. This shared understanding, however limited, created a space where a gesture of kindness, however small, could emerge. It highlights that even within the rigid structures of wartime captivity, individual moral agency could persist, leading to acts that defied the prevailing animosity. Another crucial layer to consider is the long-term impact of these experiences. For individuals like Eva and Klaus, their wartime encounters left indelible marks. Eva, upon her eventual liberation, carried with her not only the trauma of captivity but also the memory of those unexpected moments of human connection, the quiet acts of kindness that sustained her. These experiences, though born of conflict, offered a profound lesson in the enduring nature of empathy. Similarly, Klaus, returning home, would have grappled with the moral complexities of his wartime role. The memory of Eva, a quiet testament to the capacity for compassion that existed even in the heart of war. Now consider how this applies when you encounter individuals who have experienced profound hardship or trauma. Understanding the complex interplay of suffering and resilience can offer a pathway to deeper empathy and support, recognizing that even in the darkest of circumstances, the human spirit can find ways to connect and endure. The chilling winds of the Eastern Front carried with them not only the dust of destroyed cities but also the seeds of an unlikely, almost defiant spirit of cooperation. Beyond the immediate front lines, in the vast expanse of occupied territories, civilians often found themselves in precarious positions, navigating a treacherous landscape where allegiances could shift with terrifying speed. Consider the remarkable story of a network of Polish civilians who, under the brutal occupation, risked their lives to aid Soviet prisoners of war who had escaped or been left behind. This was not an act driven by grand political ideology, but by a raw, unvarnished recognition of shared suffering. These were individuals who had themselves experienced the harsh realities of occupation, the constant threat of reprisal, the scarcity of resources. Building on this foundational understanding of shared hardship, this network operated with an almost instinctual understanding of clandestine operations. They established hidden routes, communicated through coded messages, and utilized a decentralized structure that made them incredibly resilient to enemy infiltration. A farmer might offer shelter in his barn for a night, providing meager rations of bread and potatoes. A school teacher might forge identification papers, allowing a group of escaped POWs to pass through checkpoints undetected. These were not acts of altruism performed for recognition. They were quiet, dangerous necessities born from a deep-seated moral imperative. The risk was immense. Discovery meant not only severe punishment for the individuals involved, but also reprisal against entire communities. Yet the decision to help was often made without hesitation, driven by a profound empathy for fellow humans caught in the unforgiving machinery of war. Furthermore, the psychological dimension of these actions is particularly compelling. For the Polish civilians, engaging in these clandestine acts of aid provided a crucial sense of agency in a world where they felt largely powerless. It was a way of actively resisting the dehumanizing forces of occupation, of affirming their own moral values when the prevailing environment sought to extinguish them. The shared secret, the unspoken bond formed between rescuer and rescued, created a powerful connection, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and its capacity to forge solidarity even under the most oppressive conditions. This wasn't merely about survival. It was about maintaining one's humanity in the face of overwhelming barbarity. Conversely, the perspective of the Soviet POWs themselves is equally significant. Having experienced the brutality of capture and the constant threat of execution, encountering unexpected kindness from those considered part of the enemy nation was a profound and disorienting experience. It challenged the ingrained narratives of hatred and animosity that had been fostered by the war. For these individuals, the aid received was not just a physical sustenance, it was a powerful psychological balm, a reminder that compassion could exist even in the darkest of times, offering a flicker of hope in an otherwise bleak existence. This encounter with unexpected empathy could have a lasting impact, shaping their views of the conflict and the people involved. Another crucial layer to consider is the practical application of such networks in facilitating survival. Beyond mere sustenance, these civilian networks provided escaped POWs with the essential resources needed to evade capture and eventually rejoin Allied forces or find safe haven. This included information about enemy troop movements, safe routes for travel, and assistance in acquiring civilian clothing to blend in. The success of these operations often hinged on meticulous planning, unwavering trust among participants, and a shared commitment to the cause of resistance. The very act of establishing and maintaining such networks in the face of constant surveillance and the threat of betrayal speaks volumes about the extraordinary courage and moral fortitude of ordinary civilians. Now, consider how this applies when you face situations where individuals are forced to make incredibly difficult choices under duress. The stories of these networks illustrate the profound impact of collective action and unwavering moral conviction in preserving human dignity against overwhelming odds. In the stark, unforgiving winter of 1943, amidst the ravaged landscapes of Yugoslavia, a profound act of solidarity unfolded, challenging the very fabric of wartime animosity. The region, torn by brutal partisan warfare and brutal reprisals, saw communities fractured and allegiances constantly tested. Yet, it was in this crucible of conflict that a remarkable connection formed between a group of Serbian civilians and a small contingent of captured Italian soldiers. The Italians, having been abandoned by their retreating command and facing the harsh realities of a hostile environment, found themselves in a desperate situation, vulnerable to both the elements and the prevailing anti-Italian sentiment among some local populations. Building upon this precarious reality, the Serbian villagers, themselves having endured immense suffering under various occupations, recognized a shared vulnerability in the captured soldiers that transcended the imposed enmity. Driven by an innate sense of humanitarianism and a deep understanding of the brutal indifference of war, they made a collective decision to offer clandestine aid. This was not a matter of political alignment, but a visceral response to suffering. They shared what little food they had, meager rations of bread, cheese, and dried vegetables, and provided rudimentary shelter in barns and abandoned outbuildings, shielding the soldiers from the biting cold and the prying eyes of collaborators or more militant factions. This quiet act of compassion, performed under the constant threat of severe reprisal, underscored a fundamental truth, that the instinct to alleviate suffering could override ingrained prejudices and the dictates of wartime propaganda. Furthermore, this act of assistance was deeply intertwined with the shared experience of being caught in the crossfire of larger geopolitical forces. Both the Serbian villagers and the Italian soldiers were, in essence, pawns in a much larger, more brutal game. The villagers understood the precariousness of their own existence, and this understanding fostered a powerful sense of empathy for the plight of the Italian soldiers. They saw not the uniform of an occupying force, but the gaunt faces of men shivering from cold and hunger, men who, like themselves, were simply trying to survive the relentless storm of war. This shared predicament created an unexpected bridge, a silent acknowledgement of their common humanity in a world that sought to emphasize their differences. Conversely, the decision to offer aid was fraught with immense personal risk. The region was a hotbed of shifting loyalties and brutal reprisals. Any discovered instance of collaboration with the enemy could lead to immediate execution, not only for the villagers, but potentially for the entire community. Yet, the moral imperative to act, to offer succor to those in dire need, proved stronger than the pervasive fear. This highlights a critical aspect of wartime empathy. It is often not a passive sentiment, but an active, courageous choice, a deliberate act of defiance against the forces that seek to dehumanize and divide. The villagers' actions were a silent rebellion, a testament to the enduring power of human kindness in the face of overwhelming adversity. Another crucial layer to consider is the long-term impact of such covert acts of compassion. While the immediate danger was undeniable, the memory of this unexpected solidarity resonated deeply within the community. It became a quiet testament to their own moral fortitude, and a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the capacity for good persisted. For the Italian soldiers, the experience offered a profound counter-narrative to the dehumanizing propaganda they had been subjected to, a glimpse into the unexpected kindness that could exist even among those they were ostensibly at war with. This act of mutual recognition, born from shared vulnerability and a profound act of empathy, served as a potent, albeit quiet, counterpoint to the widespread brutality of the conflict, demonstrating that the threads of human connection could, and did, endure even in the most fractured of circumstances. Now consider how this applies when you encounter situations where seemingly insurmountable divides exist between groups. The echoes of such acts remind us that empathy can be a powerful force for bridging these divides, often in the most unexpected and courageous ways. The harsh realities of the Siberian gulags offered a chilling testament to the depths of human cruelty, yet within this abyss, surprising acts of shared resilience emerged. These were not battlefields in the conventional sense, but landscapes of systematic oppression where survival itself was a constant, grueling battle. Consider the experience of Pavel, a Soviet intellectual imprisoned for perceived dissent. His initial days were a brutal introduction to the dehumanizing routine. Forced labor in sub-zero temperatures, meager rations that barely sustained life, and the ever-present threat of summary punishment. The environment was designed to break the spirit, to reduce individuals to mere biological units focused solely on immediate survival. The pervasive atmosphere of suspicion and fear made genuine human connection seem like a dangerous, even impossible luxury. Building on this stark reality, however, Pavel soon discovered that even in this desolate environment, pockets of unexpected solidarity could bloom. He observed how seasoned prisoners, those who had endured years of captivity, developed intricate systems of mutual support. They shared their meager rations, offered each other encouragement during grueling work shifts, and maintained a fragile network of communication, passing vital information about camp routines and potential dangers. This wasn't about grand gestures of heroism, but about the quiet, persistent acts of care that sustained individuals through unimaginable hardship. A shared cigarette, a word of advice on how to best endure the cold, a warning about an overzealous guard. These small acts were lifelines, reaffirming their shared humanity in a place designed to strip it away. The collective struggle for survival fostered a unique form of community, a bond forged in shared suffering, and a mutual refusal to be utterly extinguished. Furthermore, the act of preserving individual identity within the Gulag system was a profound form of resistance. For intellectual prisoners like Pavel, this often involved the clandestine sharing of literature, poetry, or philosophical ideas, keeping alive the spark of critical thought in an environment that demanded conformity. They would memorize passages, whisper verses to each other in the dark, or painstakingly etch words onto scraps of wood or fabric. This intellectual and spiritual defiance, though seemingly small against the immense power of the state, was crucial in maintaining a sense of self and resisting the complete erosion of their identity. It demonstrated that even when stripped of all external freedoms, the inner life, the realm of thought and memory, could remain a sanctuary, a space where true humanity could persist. Conversely, the very nature of the Gulag system, with its emphasis on isolation and suspicion, also created opportunities for betrayal and exploitation. Some prisoners, desperate to curry favor with the guards or simply driven by self-preservation, would inform on others, leading to harsher punishments or extended sentences. This dark side of camp life served as a constant reminder of the fragility of trust and the immense psychological pressure to conform. It highlighted the stark contrast between those who clung to their moral principles and those who succumbed to the corrupting influence of the oppressive system. The struggle for survival was not merely physical, it was a deeply moral and psychological battle, fought on multiple fronts. Another crucial layer to consider is the long-term psychological impact of such experiences. Survivors of the Gulag often carried deep emotional scars, grappling with trauma, survivor's guilt, and a profound sense of loss. Yet many also spoke of the enduring strength they found in the human connections forged during their captivity. The shared struggle, The acts of kindness and the collective resistance had, paradoxically, created bonds that transcended the suffering. These experiences, though born of immense hardship, offered a profound lesson in the resilience of the human spirit and its enduring capacity for empathy, even when subjected to the most extreme forms of oppression. Now consider how this applies when you encounter individuals who have faced profound adversity. Their capacity for resilience and their understanding of the importance of human connection, even in the darkest of times, can offer invaluable insights into the enduring strength of the human spirit. The war, a relentless engine of destruction, often created a peculiar inversion of societal norms, forcing individuals into situations where their ingrained moral compasses were severely tested. Consider the harrowing reality faced by civilians in territories subjected to widespread conscription and forced labor by occupying forces. In these contexts, the very act of survival could necessitate complicity, a moral compromise that left deep psychological scars. Imagine a young woman forced to work in a factory producing munitions for an invading army. Her labor, though coerced, directly contributed to the war effort against her own people. This wasn't a choice made out of conviction, but a desperate measure to protect herself and her family from starvation or worse. The guilt and self-recrimination stemming from such involuntary participation were profound, creating an internal conflict that could be as devastating as any external threat. The war didn't just impose physical hardships, it engineered moral dilemmas that fractured the very sense of self. Building on this complex interplay of coercion and complicity, observe the subtle, often unacknowledged ways in which occupying forces themselves grappled with the ethical implications of their actions. While the official narrative often emphasized unwavering obedience and ruthless efficiency, individual soldiers, removed from their home environments and confronted with the stark realities of occupation, could experience a dissonance between their orders and their personal values. A German soldier stationed in occupied France, for instance, might witness the casual cruelty of his superiors towards the civilian population. While outwardly conforming, he might inwardly recoil from such behavior, perhaps finding small private ways to mitigate the suffering, a delayed report, a feigned ignorance of illicit activities, or a moment of silent shared understanding with a local. These actions, born not of overt rebellion, but of a quiet, internal resistance to dehumanization, reveal the persistent presence of individual conscience, even within rigidly hierarchical military structures. Furthermore, the concept of enemy in wartime was not static. It was a fluid construct, constantly shaped by propaganda, personal experience, and the shifting tides of conflict. For individuals on both sides of the front lines, the abstract enemy could, through direct interaction, begin to take on more human characteristics. Consider the experiences of medics who, regardless of allegiance, often found themselves tending to the wounded of both their own forces and the enemy. In the sterile, focused environment of a field hospital, the shared vulnerability of injury could temporarily eclipse the animosity of war. A Soviet nurse tending to a grievously wounded German soldier, or an American medic providing aid to a captured enemy combatant, were instances where the shared experience of pain and the instinct to heal could momentarily override the dictates of war. These were not acts of forgiveness or reconciliation, but of recognizing a fundamental shared humanity in the face of suffering. Conversely, the psychological toll of witnessing or participating in acts that violated one's moral code could manifest in profound and lasting ways. This phenomenon, often termed moral injury, goes beyond typical trauma responses. It involves a deep sense of guilt, shame, and betrayal stemming from actions or inaction that transgress one's core ethical beliefs. A soldier ordered to participate in an atrocity, or a civilian forced into complicity with an occupying power, might carry this burden for a lifetime. The war created situations where individuals were forced to violate their own deeply held principles for the sake of survival, leading to a fractured sense of self and a persistent internal struggle. This moral residue, often unspoken and unrecognized, is a significant, though invisible, cost of conflict. Another crucial layer to consider is how the very nature of total war blurred the lines between combatant and civilian, further complicating moral landscapes. In prolonged conflicts, where entire populations were mobilized and civilian infrastructure became targets, the distinction between those fighting and those merely enduring became increasingly indistinct. This meant that acts of violence, or conversely, acts of kindness, could occur in contexts far removed from traditional battlefields, involving individuals with no direct military role. Consider the complex moral calculus faced by civilians in occupied territories who might be forced to collaborate with occupying forces for survival, while simultaneously engaging in acts of resistance or offering aid to those persecuted by the same forces. These individuals navigated a moral tightrope, their choices dictated by a constant, agonizing assessment of risk and necessity. Now, consider how this applies when you face situations where ethical boundaries seem blurred and choices carry significant consequences. Understanding these complex wartime scenarios can offer a framework for navigating difficult ethical decisions in our own lives, recognizing that morality often exists in shades of gray, especially under duress. The vast ideological chasm of the Eastern Front often overshadowed the individual acts of defiance against its brutal logic. Beyond the officially sanctioned narratives of nationalistic fervor and unyielding hatred, pockets of quiet resistance to dehumanization persisted, particularly within the complex ecosystem of occupied territories. Consider the clandestine operations of the White Rose Group in Nazi Germany itself. This wasn't a military resistance movement. It was a small band of university students, led by Hans and Sophie Scholl, who dared to challenge the regime through the distribution of anti-war leaflets. Their methods were simple: anonymously penned appeals for passive resistance and critical thinking, painstakingly copied and distributed under the cover of darkness. The stark contrast lay between the state-sanctioned violence and the students' reliance on the power of reasoned argument and moral appeal. Their actions, though seemingly small against the colossal machinery of war, represented a profound act of reclaiming intellectual and moral agency. Building upon this foundation of intellectual resistance, the White Rose movement exemplified a specific kind of courage: the courage to speak truth to power, even when silence was the path of least resistance. Their leaflets, though quickly suppressed and their authors ultimately executed, carried a potent message that individual conscience could not be entirely extinguished, that the pursuit of truth and justice remained a vital human imperative, even in the face of overwhelming oppression. This particular form of empathy wasn't about direct aid to suffering individuals, but about a broader, more abstract commitment to human dignity and the preservation of critical thought. It was a belief that awakening the minds of others, even a few, was a form of resistance that struck at the heart of the regime's control, which relied heavily on propaganda and the suppression of dissent. Furthermore, the psychological impact of such dissent, even when covert, was significant. For the students, the act of creating and distributing the leaflets was a deeply personal commitment, a conscious decision to align themselves with their moral convictions despite the extreme personal risk. This internal fortitude, this unwavering adherence to principle, served as a powerful counterpoint to the pervasive fear and conformity that characterized Nazi society. Their actions, though ultimately tragic, offered a beacon of hope to those who felt isolated in their opposition, demonstrating that even a small voice, speaking with conviction, could resonate. It was a testament to the idea that true courage often lies not in physical confrontation, but in the quiet, unwavering assertion of one's moral beliefs. Conversely, the state's response to the White Rose underscored the regime's deep-seated fear of independent thought. The swift and brutal suppression of the group, the show trials, and the public executions were not merely punitive measures. They were calculated attempts to extinguish any flicker of intellectual dissent and to reinforce the absolute authority of the state. This reaction highlights how effectively the regime understood the power of ideas and the potential threat posed by individuals who dared to question its narrative. The very intensity of their response served, in a twisted way, as validation of the students' courage and the significance of their message. Another crucial layer to consider is the enduring legacy of the White Rose. Though their active resistance was tragically short-lived, their story, preserved through smuggled documents and later historical accounts, became a powerful symbol of moral courage and intellectual defiance. It demonstrated that acts of conscience, even when seemingly futile in the immediate context of war, could have a lasting impact, inspiring future generations and serving as a reminder that the fight for truth and human dignity is a continuous struggle. Their story transcends the specific context of World War II, offering a timeless lesson on the importance of individual responsibility and the power of speaking out against injustice. even at the greatest personal cost. Now consider how this applies when you face situations where you feel compelled to speak out against wrongdoing, even when it seems daunting or unpopular. The example of the white rose reminds us that the courage of conviction can leave an indelible mark, echoing far beyond the immediate moment. Reflecting on this journey through the crucible of global conflict, we've navigated landscapes where the very definition of humanity was tested, stretched, and, at times, seemingly on the verge of irreparable fracture. The echoes we've uncovered are not confined to the grand narratives of battles won or lost, nor to the stark pronouncements of victors and vanquished. Instead, they resonate in the quiet spaces, in the almost imperceptible shifts in human interaction that occurred when the veneer of enmity was momentarily, profoundly, stripped away. It's as if we've been sifting through the debris of immense destruction, not just for remnants of what was broken, but for the faint, persistent glimmers of what refused to be extinguished. The persistent undercurrent has been the remarkable, often surprising capacity of individuals to transcend the imposed divisions, to recognize a shared vulnerability that spoke louder than the roar of cannons or the pronouncements of hate. As we pivot towards the final reflection, consider how these disparate moments, these seemingly isolated instances of grace, begin to coalesce. They form not a simple tapestry, but something more akin to a hidden constellation where individual points of light, when viewed in aggregate, reveal a larger, more enduring pattern. The tension between the pervasive forces of division and the persistent, almost instinctual, drive towards connection has been a constant theme. We've witnessed how the abstract labels of enemy and ally could dissolve in the face of immediate, shared peril, or in the quiet recognition of a fellow human being's suffering. This isn't to diminish the horrors of war, but to acknowledge the complex, often contradictory ways in which the human spirit responds when pushed to its absolute limits. The implications of these encounters suggest that the foundations of our shared humanity are far more robust than the cataclysms of conflict might suggest. In light of these insights, the path forward towards understanding the enduring significance of these echoes becomes clearer. The resilience we've observed is not merely a passive endurance of hardship, but an active, often courageous, assertion of values that lie at the core of our shared existence. It's about the quiet rebellion against dehumanization, the persistent affirmation of empathy in environments designed to extinguish it. The cumulative effect of these explorations points towards a fundamental truth, that the capacity for compassion is not an aberration in times of war, but an intrinsic element of the human condition, one that can, under the most challenging circumstances, find powerful and unexpected expression. As we prepare to draw these threads together for a final, encompassing perspective, we are left with a profound sense of the enduring strength that lies not just in survival, but in the preservation of our shared moral and emotional core. The lingering chill of these historical accounts, though rooted in the frostbitten landscapes of global conflict, carries with it a warmth that defies the season. We have journeyed through the heart of a world at war, not to recount the mechanics of its destruction, but to seek out the whispers of its enduring spirit. What has emerged from the ashes of battlefields and the shadows of occupied territories is not a simple narrative of survival, but a testament to the indomitable nature of human empathy. These stories, often hidden beneath the weight of official histories, reveal a profound truth, that even when confronted with the most systematic attempts to dehumanize, the instinct to connect, to offer solace, and to recognize shared vulnerability persists. It is a resilience that does not erase the scars of war, nor does it seek to sanitize its horrors, but rather it illuminates the enduring capacity for grace that can bloom in the most desolate of grounds. We've seen how, in the face of overwhelming animosity, individuals chose to see beyond the uniform, beyond the imposed labels of enemy and ally, a shared glance between adversaries pinned down by enemy fire. A clandestine act of kindness offered to a captured soldier, a whispered word of encouragement exchanged in the oppressive silence of a labor camp. These are the moments that truly define the resilience of our shared humanity. They are not grand pronouncements, but quiet acts of defiance against the very nature of war, which seeks to sever these fundamental connections. The courage displayed was not always the thunderous roar of the battlefield, but often the silent, persistent refusal to let hatred extinguish compassion. These acts, though sometimes born of pragmatic necessity or a deeply ingrained moral compass, ultimately underscore a universal truth, that the capacity for empathy is an intrinsic part of our being, a light that, however dimly, can continue to flicker even in the deepest of trenches. The echoes of humanity we have traced across the years are not merely historical curiosities. They are vital reminders of our potential. They speak to a profound truth that even in the darkest of times, when the world seems intent on tearing itself apart, the threads of connection can hold. These stories serve as a powerful counterpoint to the narratives of inevitable conflict, suggesting that the choices we make, individually and collectively, can shape a different future. The enduring impact of these moments lies in their ability to inspire, to remind us that the seeds of kindness, forgiveness, and reconciliation are always present, waiting for the right conditions to grow. They challenge us to look beyond the immediate divisions, to seek out the common ground, and to recognize the inherent worth in every individual, regardless of the circumstances that may seem to set them apart. The true practice of these echoes begins now, in the quiet contemplation of these enduring human acts. It is in recognizing that the same capacity for compassion that sustained individuals through the darkest hours of war resides within us all. The challenge, then, is to cultivate it, to nurture it in our daily lives, and to allow it to guide our interactions, even when faced with disagreement or adversity. For kindness doesn't end wars, but as these profound accounts attest, it most certainly survives them, a testament to the unyielding spirit that defines us.